Okay, guys, so this is going to be a video just giving you an introduction to getting started with using Scratch. So you've got two options with using Scratch. One version of Scratch is an application that can be downloaded and installed on a computer, and all of the laptops have Scratch installed. Or you can use the Scratch Online editor. And so for this video, I'm going to be using the Scratch Online editor. I recommend using it simply because once you've signed in, anything that you create, that you've saved, will be available for you on any computer on the online Scratch program. If you do prefer to use the version that's installed on the laptops, it just means you have to make sure that you save your program somewhere where it's going to be available next time you log in on a different laptop. And so that means you would need either to upload it to Google Drive or to your network drive. So if you know how to do all that and you prefer to use the desktop version, awesome. Otherwise, use this version. And so I'm at scratch.mit.edu. If you just type in Scratch in Google or from the class website, there'll be a link to it as well. For most of my classes, I will provide you with login information. So I'll have an account pre-made for you. If you already have an account, then great, you can just go ahead and sign in. So for this video, I'm just going to simply go start creating. And you can definitely do that. So you can use Scratch without actually logging in. The problem is if you do that, you won't actually have your program saved unless at the end you choose to go File and then Save to your computer. And then you have the same issue that you had with the desktop version, which is making sure that that program is saved somewhere like Google Drive. You could upload it to your Google Drive. Not a Google Doc, like not a document, but a Google Drive file upload. But then you would need to download it from from Google Drive, and then go load from your computer and upload it to the Scratch website. So being logged in is certainly simpler. All right, so we're looking at the Scratch interface, and there are different sections. This section over here is called the stage, and it comes by default preloaded with one object that is appearing on the stage, which is, these objects are called sprites. And so in this case, it's a kitty cat. So if I were to go and click on this link, it will show me my actual game, so the actual, or whatever it is, your Scratch project, the visible Scratch project. So the way you start is a Scratch game or a Scratch project is clicking the green flag. And in this case, nothing is happening because I haven't actually done anything yet. Okay, so it just comes preloaded with this one sprite. So if you want to delete that, you can just go ahead and delete there. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go and I'm just going to click down below where the sprites are available. And there's all these different pre-chosen or pre-drawn sprites. So a bunch of different what is sometimes referred to as assets. And so let's say I'm going to choose the Cheesy Puffs. So now you can see I've got Cheesy Puffs loaded here in my Scratch editor. If I move it around, you can actually see it's telling me an X and a Y position of where the Cheesy Puffs is. There's also a size, so I could change the size of my Cheesy Puffs to smaller. And then there's also, you can actually create your own. So there's also an editor, so you can go ahead and create your own sprites. All right, so I've got my Cheesy Puffs right now, and so I'm now at this point, I'm going to try and program this sprite to do something. And so if you go over here, here are all the different code commands that are built into the Scratch editor, organized by color, by different theme. So up here is motion. So basically the Scratch environment includes a lot of pre-built commands that you might find typically in what would be called a game engine, so a game development engine. So typically people that are making something, they don't build everything right from scratch. They're using libraries of programs that other people have built in the form of commands that they can go and use and build on top of that. So there's typically layers and layers and layers of libraries that are used, and in the case of building a game, you'd be building it on top of a game engine. So there's sort of common game engines you may have heard of, like Unity is a common one that developers use to build games. But Scratch has their own built-in. So one is motion. So there's a whole bunch of stuff to do with motion. So I'm going to go and I'm going to grab the command move 10 steps. Okay. So if I go and place move 10 steps, and then I go to test my game, I'm going to click the green flag because that means go. That's the starting of my game. I click and nothing happens. And that's because I haven't actually hooked up this command to any kind of what's called an event. So almost all programs these days are what are called event-driven programming. It means something happens, and then in response to that something, some command or sequence of commands gets run. And this is true for anything, whether your program is scripting a web page, or it is a game, or a word processor. Everything is doing the commands in response to something happening called an event. And you can kind of see in Scratch, they kind of try and help you with giving you a hint by having this little divot in the top of the command here, indicating that it's expecting something to be there. So I'm going to click over here to the events, and I'm going to choose one of these events. And so I'm going to simply choose the green flag event. So I'm going to go when green flag clicked, move 10 steps. So let's see how that looks. I click, and awesome, my Cheesy Puffs moves. Okay, but now what I want is I want my Cheesy Puffs to just move continuously without me having to click. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another standard programming concept, which is called a loop. So this is under the control section of Scratch. And there's a bunch of different loops. One is this is a repeat loop, so repeat and then some number that you can specify, and everything within the loop would get repeated, in this case 10 times. I'm going to use a special loop called the forever loop. I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to move my 10 steps inside of that loop. So what it's going to do is when the green flag clicks, this forever loop is going to happen, and everything that's in here, right now it's one command, is going to move 10 steps, go to the bottom, come back to the beginning, and keep going for 10 steps repeatedly. So I'm going to try this out. I'm going to click my green flag, and awesome, my Cheesy Puffs move. However, they only move to the edge of the stage, and then of course they can't keep moving forever. Forever means the whole time the program's running. And it stops because it can't keep moving. All right, so to deal with that problem, I can come back to the motion, and again, built into Scratch is a solution for this, which is if on edge bounce. So I could try and figure out programming to figure out, okay, if the Cheesy Puffs gets to the edge, maybe turn it around or change the position on the screen. But if I just go and I plunk in if on edge bounce, then Scratch automatically takes care of that for me, and it'll move it back and forth. Now, the direction it's changing when it hits the edge, and so in Scratch by default that causes it to change direction that it's pointing, and so the Cheesy Puffs go upside down. You can change that by, instead of using the move command, I could use the change X command, which is right here, and that would allow me to move because X is back and forth and Y is up and down. So kind of like a Cartesian coordinate system you might have found in math. So positive X would be to the right, negative X to the left, positive Y up, negative Y down. But I'm just going to leave this like this because I really like my Cheesy Puffs going back and forth and flipping when they're going to the left. All right, so far so good. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to add a new sprite. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to go down to Mr. Crab, and I'm going to include Mr. Crab in here. All right, so my idea for this game is that I am going to allow myself to control the crab using the keyboard. So keyboard events for moving of the crab, and then the Cheesy Puffs just simply moving back and forth. And you'll notice that all of my programming seems to have disappeared. Well, that's because I am selecting the crab now because the programming is per sprite. So if I go back to Cheesy Puffs, there's the commands related to the Cheesy Puffs. So here I am back on the crab. I've got no code so far. So I'm going to go to the events because remember we're doing event-driven programming. I'm going to choose in this case when something key pressed, and I'm going to go when the right arrow key is pressed. I will go move 10 steps, and I'm going to go when the left arrow key is pressed. I'm going to go move 10 steps, and then I'm going to go hook up events for up and down. So when up arrow is pressed, I will move 10 steps, and then finally when down arrow pressed, it will move 10 steps. Okay, so now I'm going to try this out, but it's not going to quite work out the way I expected. I'm going to start, so there's my Cheesy Puffs. So I'm clicking the right arrow, and awesome, every time I move, my crab goes right. But now look what happens when I press left, still goes right, up, still goes right, down, still goes right. Okay, so the problem is that right now the crab is pointing to the right. So we're only saying move, we're not using the change X and Y, which I could have, but I chose to use this move 10 steps. So the solution is I should have in front of each of these commands a point in direction. So I'm going to make sure that my crab is pointing in the direction that I'm expecting it to move based on the arrow. So I'm going to go and do that for each of these, and then for each of these, so the right arrow is already pointing to the right. I'm going to click on the left, and you can gives you this nice little visual to show you where it's pointing. The up arrow, I want to go up, and the down arrow, I want to go down. All right, awesome. So now let's try it again. So now if I go left, it goes left. If I go up, it goes up. If I go right, it goes right. Now the fact that it's pointing, changing direction means that I get this different direction that it's actually pointing because crabs move sideways, so that's why it's moving that way. So again, if you didn't like that, you can certainly change that. There's a couple of options. One is set rotation style, so you don't tell it to turn up and down, or you can do the change X and Y, and that won't change the actual direction it's pointing. However, I'm happy with this. All right, so here we go. I have my ability to move my crab around, and I've got my Cheesy Puffs moving back and forth. So now what I want to do is I want to incorporate a game where I can actually win or lose. All right, and so to do that, I'm going to include the concept of a variable. So I'm going to click down here and I go variables, and I'm going to click on make a variable. So I'm going to call my variable name score, and I'm going to allow this for all sprites. So that's basically in programming that's called scope. So basically it's like at what level in your program is that variable, and so a variable is something that contains information. Where all is that available in your program? And you've got two choices in scope. For scope in Scratch, it's either all sprites or this sprite. We're going to just leave it by default all sprites. So you can ignore all that stuff I just said and just simply leave it by default, and that'll work fine for now. And I'm going to go OK. So by default, the variable contents are shown. So here I am with a score of 0. So here's my idea. I want every time that the crab touches the Cheesy Puffs, I will get a score. My score will go up by 1. So to do that, I could either do this under Cheesy Puffs or under the crab. Basically what I'm doing in this case is I'm doing what's called collision detection. I want to know, is the crab sprite colliding with the Cheesy Puffs? Okay, and so I'm going to do that under the crab sprite, but again, you could do it either, you could put it under Cheesy Puffs and say, is the Cheesy Puffs colliding with the crab? Or I could put it under the crab and say, is the crab colliding with the Cheesy Puffs? And one of the cool things about programming is there is no one way to do anything. You can do anything in so many different ways, which is why programming really is an art. Um, and you can imagine that most programs very, very quickly get really, really complicated. And so how you choose to do things, how you choose to implement things, how you choose to organize things is really important. It's what makes the difference between a badly written, hard to understand, hard to debug program versus a well-written, clean, aesthetically pleasing program. All right, so I'm going to put a collision detection code, which is checking to see, is this crab touching the cheesy puffs? So to do that, I'm going to actually use the green flag event because I'm wanting this collision detection to happen the entire time the program is running. I'm then going to use one of my loops, and I want a forever loop because I want this to be checking the entire time the program is running. And then inside my loop, my forever loop, I'm going to grab a conditional statement. So a conditional statement is a statement where there is an evaluation of the condition to see if it is true or false. And then if it's true, in this case, it's going to do, if it's true, it's going to do the contents of my conditional statement. So if something, then, and then inside that is the code that's going to be run. So what I want to happen when the, actually first I'll do the conditional statement. So I'm going to go back up to, I'm going to go to sensing. And so here is some built-in collision detection code. And so I'm going to go if touching, so you can see Scratch is kind of helping you that this is condition. It's got this little triangle or sort of a diamond shape that'll fit into my conditional statement. And I'm going to, so if touching cheesy puffs, okay, because we are the crab and I want to know if it's touching, if the crab is touching the cheesy puffs, then I'm going to go down to my variables. I'm going to say change and my variable, which is the score, by 1. Okay, awesome. So let me close this or stop the game, and I'm going to zoom out to the full size of my game, and I'm going to go start. So here I am. I can move my crab around, but if I touch the cheesy puffs, you can see it's going up. But oh, it's not going up by 1. It's going up by a lot more than 1. All right, so let's try and see what's going on. I'm going to stop my game and close and come back over here. Okay, so what's happening is that my forever loop has this conditional statement, and this forever loop is getting run at the speed that my programming commands are being processed, which is very, very fast. So it is constantly running this forever loop, checking the conditional statement, and every time that it's true, it'll increase the score by 1. And so, of course, as I move around, once I collide with the cheesy puffs, even though the cheesy puffs are moving, I would be very, very rapidly increasing the score. So what I might want to do is I might want to try and put in a move of the crab every time it touches the cheesy puff. So have it move to some fixed position. I might also want to make sure I have setup code, meaning some initial setup conditions that will be set up every time I start my game. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my crab down to this bottom left corner of the stage, and I'm going to go to the motion, and I am going to say go to X, and then right now it's already pre-populated the X and Y coordinates of where I've moved the crab to here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to put this inside the conditional statement. So now what's going to happen is every time I touch the cheesy puffs, I'm going to get a score of 1, and then I'm going to go back to the start position. So I won't get a whole ton of points unless the cheesy puffs happen to be touching me when I'm in this particular position down in the bottom left corner. So at least it should be a little better. So let me try that now. So I'm going to go run. So I'm going to go up. So right now my score is at 134. Now I went up to 135. Try it again, 136. Okay, that's working more like I expect. I probably should have also done some more initialization code. I'm going to go back to variables. I'm going to go set variable, which is set score to 0. All right, awesome. So I now have a conditional checking of where I see if I'm touching the cheesy puffs, and I only increase my score by 1 when it happens, and then go back to my initial score. All right, so at this point, I might also want to have some kind of a win condition. So that is when my score reaches a certain value, then I might want to declare that you have won. So to do that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the control and grab another conditional statement. I can stick it inside of the same forever loop, so I can just have a sequence of conditional statements inside the loop. And I'm going to go back to operators section here. I'm going to go to the operators section, and I'm going to use one of these greater than signs. So if something is greater than something, and I'm going to plunk that in there. And so the something is I'm going to use my score. So I'm going to go look at score. I'm going to grab the value of score. So it's saying if the value of the variable score is greater than, and let's say 9. So or actually, I'll do 4. So that means when it gets to 5. Okay, I'm not doing equals to 5. I prefer to use greater than in case for some reason it doesn't get caught at the actual value of 5 for whatever reason my conditional statement isn't triggered. But I could have done equals 5, but instead I'm doing greater than 4, which should be the same thing. And then maybe what I will do is I will say put in here. I will go say you have won, exclamation mark. Maybe I will go to motion, and I will, or no, actually control, and I will just go stop all. Okay, all right, so let's zoom out here. And let's try my game. So I'm starting, the score is 0, my crab is on the bottom right, I am moving up, and here we go, score of 1, awesome, score of 2, more awesome, score of 3, more awesome, score of 4. Some people might think this is not the greatest game, but score of 5, and oh, what happened? I see what happened. Okay, so what happened was I said if score is greater than 4, then say you have won, and then stop all. Okay, so what happened is basically all scripts just stopped, including this. No, actually, so that's not what happened. Say you have won is a command, but there was no a time saying like be on that command for a certain amount of time and display that text string. So instead it just said say that and then immediately stopped everything, and I didn't actually ever see it saying say you have won. So what I should have done is I should have maybe said say you have won. So let me just go and try this again. And I'm going to say it for 2 seconds. So this command is going to basically pause on the say command for 2 seconds before then going and stopping. All right, and then rather than having to go up, I'm just going to change that to 2. So now my score will be, the game will be won when you reach a score of 3. All right, so let's try that again. So I'm going to go back here, I start, and I go up. So 1 and 2 and 3, and it says you have won, and everything stopped. Awesome. All right, so I may also want to spice things up a little bit. For example, right now my cheesy puffs are only moving just directly across, so maybe I might put in a little turn in here. So maybe turn a few degrees. Let's see if that makes it move a little more interestingly. Okay, so now my cheesy puffs are moving more interestingly. And then maybe I want to have like a bad guy. I might add a new sprite, and if the and so there's a bad guy moving around randomly, and then if you touch the crab with your bad guy, you would lose points. And if your score below goes, or maybe you'd have a health level, a new variable which is a health level, and if you lose a certain number of lives, you've lost. Okay, and so if you are doing a game, I do want you to definitely have win conditions and lose conditions. I would also recommend having a initial startup screen that explains how you play your game. And so if you go over here, there's a backdrop. You can go choose a backdrop, and you can take backdrops and then customize them, add your own text. You can just simply choose a blank backdrop with the paint editor and create your own backdrops. And then you can switch from like a startup backdrop, the game backdrop, and then maybe a win backdrop and a lose backdrop. So lots of options with Scratch. So for almost all of the projects that I'm asking you to do, I will be looking for events. So you need to show me examples of using events. I'm going to be wanting you to show me the use of loops. So that's like a forever or a repeat. I'm going to want to see some uses of conditional statements. So like an if-then or an if-then-else statement. I'm also going to be wanting to see you using variables. And then in some cases, I may also ask you to be using what's called a block. And so a block is basically a way of combining commands, one or more commands, into a sequence that then can get used repeatedly. So in programming, sometimes it's referred to as you should be dry, D-R-Y, don't repeat yourself. Very important with programming in order to make it more readable and more functional, more debuggable. So a block in other languages is typically called a function, and you can pass values to blocks. So if I click here on make a block, you give it a name, and then you can add input values. So here is a number or some text or a Boolean, so that's something that is true or false. And so in some cases I may ask you to incorporate a block into your assignment, but that'll be in the actual assignment descriptions. All right, that's it for the first quick intro to using Scratch on the web.